What's up everyone, it's Sprometheus, and today we're going to dive back in to the always interesting and highly debatable world of espresso anatomy. And this time we're going to take a deep dive into the Lungo shot. The Lungo, which in Italian means long, is one of those espresso methods that I just don't see very often and rarely see on a menu. It doesn't have nearly half the notoriety as its siblings, the standard espresso and the famed ristretto. Each type of espresso shot has its own overall appeal. The ristretto is dense and sweet, your standard espresso carries a bit more balance and clarity, and the Lungo comes in at the end with a longer, milder shot and has generally an uptick in bitterness. But we should always remember that even though bitter is generally seen as a negative thing, it isn't always bad. Coffee is inherently bitter, and that perceived bitterness in your coffee helps elevate other flavors. Plus, overall, Lungos being bitter is kind of the general view and isn't always the case. But in the end, it's really hard to generalize espresso shots because we all know that sometimes they can be
nice, and
other times they can go terribly wrong. And just like its fellow espresso siblings, there's a lot of debate on how to properly make a Lungo shot. So I decided to do some research, and I dug around the internet, read some articles, looked at some forums, lost some brain cells, and at the end of it, I came out with 3 popular methods that we're going to try today. The first is what I'll call the hybrid method. It's a mix of the traditional recipe with a modern twist, utilizing what we've learned about how even flow affects extraction. So for that one, we'll double our yield and add 10 seconds of brew time. The second method is based on brew ratios. So ristretto is often described as a 1-to-1 ratio, and espresso is a 1-to-2, so that makes a Lungo a 1-to-3. Keeping that math in mind, a ristretto is 15 seconds, a standard shot is 30, so it makes sense that a Lungo should be around 45 seconds. The third method comes in straight from the beacon of knowledge, Wikipedia, and this is what you'll likely find when searching for a Lungo recipe in Google. It comes in with a brew time of 60 seconds and a whopping yield of 130 to 150 grams. So in this video, I'm going to brew and break down these shots in terms of the flavor differences, including sweetness, bitterness, balance, acidity, texture, and aftertaste. Lastly, and mostly out of pure curiosity, I'll calculate the extraction percentages of each group to see how that may or may not relate to the perceived taste feedback. For this experiment, I've opted to use this washed, single-origin Ethiopian from my friends at Wonder State Coffee. Personally, I found my best results in Lungo shots from using these fruity and floral-forward coffees, mainly because shorter and even standard espresso shots tend to be highly intense and bright with these kinds of coffees, and that tends to muddle a lot of the flavor complexities in that specific coffee. Anyway, that's enough talk, now let's make some espresso. First up, I'm going to be pulling shots using the hybrid method. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, that method is going to be doubling our yield and adding 10 seconds of brew time from our standard espresso. So let's just say our standard shot is 17 grams in, 34 grams out in roughly 20 seconds. So for this style Lungo, we're going to aim for a 68 gram yield in roughly 30 seconds. Since I'm looking to get double the output with only a little extra time than the standard shot, I'm going to give the grind a small adjustment coarser to help speed up that flow. Other than that small change, everything will be staying the same in terms of puck preparation. After a bit of dialing in, I was able to get them landing in range of the time and output goal. The shot was mild and sweet with a pleasant bit of acidity up front. It's well balanced with a surprisingly decent body and a juicy mouthfeel. All in all, it's a very palatable shot with nuance but lower upfront intensity. I would like to get a bit more fruit in the cup, but the aftertaste is nice and doesn't leave a drying sensation. To test the extraction, I pulled a few extra shots. The average extraction percentage came out to 23.48%. High percentages are to be expected for longer shots in general, but this was not over extracted and landed well within the sweet spot for this coffee. The next brew method for a Lungo is using standard ratios. So it's pretty agreed upon that a Lungo is a 1-to-3 ratio, so that's what we're going to aim for. Using 17 grams of coffee means we're going to aim for an output of 51 grams in about 45 seconds. Due to this method using a longer overall shot time but a lower output than the previous pulls means I need to grind a bit finer. After a few shots, the planets aligned and I was able to get within the targeted recipe. The front of the shot was surprisingly flat. Not much floral or fruit to speak of. In fact, it came across more herbal. The acidity was as mild as the first shot, but without the floral or fruit notes. The shot fails to bring out the life that I know is in this coffee, and the aftertaste was bitter and astringent. After pulling and testing a few shots, the average extraction percentage came out to 23.15%. Even though this shot is brewed for a longer time than the first method, it illustrates something I've been saying for a while, that a more even flow of water through the puck will often create a better extraction in terms of the numbers and oftentimes the taste. The fines needed to slow down this shot by about 15 seconds likely increased channeling, which reduced the extraction percentage and pulled out some of those unpleasant solubles that weren't present in the first method. Last but not least, I'm going to do what I'm calling the WIKI Lungo, which is probably the longest shot I've ever pulled in terms of time and output in the history of my time as a barista or making coffee. This one is a beast. I'll be aiming for 130 gram output with a 60-second brew time. I've even opted to go towards the lower end of this shot, the upper end being 170 grams output. I don't think we're going to be missing much with those 40 or 50 grams. So to make this shot happen, I need to adjust my grind much coarser. The previous pull is less than half of what I'm aiming for here, and the shot time on this one is only 15 seconds longer. A few shots later, I was on the right track and was able to snag one within the parameters. And one thing I should point out is that these shots get really messy. They may start out really nice and clean and run properly, but as you start to get into the 30, 40, 60 second range, things start to devolve pretty quickly. You're going to get some spurting and some nastiness, so just keep a towel handy. You're going to need it. Right out of the gate, this thing is just sort of wild to look at. But that's where the enjoyment ends. It tastes like a textbook example of over-extraction. It's bitter, it's thin, the flavor and the aftertaste have no evidence of the beautiful Ethiopian buried underneath all that water, and it's just overall not a pleasant experience. After testing 3 shots, the average extraction percentage for this method is 24.13%, which is the highest of the 3 Lungo methods, but also serves as a great example that chasing high extractions isn't always the key to success, and there is a point of diminishing returns with extraction. This was by far and away the worst tasting of all 3 methods. It lacked nearly in every department except bitterness, and without the sweetness to balance it, it creates just a mess of a drink. In the end, I think the Lungo is the misunderstood sibling of the Espresso family. Just like the Ristretto, it has a time and a place where it really shines, but it isn't the jack of all trades that the standard Espresso is. For me, the Lungo is my starting point for dialing in those bright, fruity and floral forward coffees. In my experience, you're more likely to find that sweet spot for those coffees in the higher yield end of the spectrum. In this case, the hybrid method came out on top for me in terms of its flavor, balance, sweetness, and everything that goes into making a great shot of espresso. But we also have to look at just the huge differences in personal preferences in coffees and all those things, so I highly recommend you try out a couple of these recipes. You may be able to skip the WIKI Lungo and just try them out and play with them and see where they take you. Anyway, that's all I've got on this topic. Drop those comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Lungos in general, if you love them, if you hate them, if you have a favorite type of coffee to do with them, if you have any thoughts, concerns, comments on the video or espresso in general, drop those down there as well. And as always, I'll see y'all next week. And of course, a big thank you to my July Patreons, Ads, James B, David, Hamad, Christopher, John K, Squeegee, Rowe, Brian, Lisa, Thomas B, Andre, Rick Racer, Sean, Joey, Thomas S, Noel, Spookus, Bound Coffee, Mika, Samantha, Nathan, Aiden, Jonathan, Claire, Steven, James K, Josh, Andrew, Ollie, Ninja Warrior Coffee, Testing 123, Horison, Bobby, Corey C, Curry, Dave B, Jerry, Marcus, Nicholas, Paul, RD, Tim, and Matt, Tony, Zachary V, Tyler, Jonathan B, and UK Espresso. And of course, a big thank you to the Barista and Barback tiers. If you want any information on my Patreon, there's a link in the description and in the upper right hand corner right now. And lastly, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that little bell button for notifications of new videos posted every Friday. Follow my Instagram at Sprometheus, my blog at Sprometheus.com, my coffee at littlegiant.coffee, and as always, stay caffeinated. Pony Boy.